Let's move to China now, and there are several dimensions and problems that arise out of that. And let's start with the military dimension. We've had the aggression in the Galwan Valley and others. We've seen some sort of pushback from China in the last month because of the resistance we've put up on this and this thing. Where do we stand on the military or the aggressive intent that China has on the border? Do you see an end to it? Where have we reached in that confrontation, if you'd like to call it?
Well, one of the, we did talk about a volatile world and the COVID situation. We were, I would say, very preoccupied with dealing with the first wave of the COVID crisis. We found that a sort of a huge buildup of Chinese forces along the border areas in our western sector in Ladakh, in our eastern sector in Ladakh, what we call Western Ladakh. And also attempts at multiple transgressions at various points, which are in clearly, I mean, both the amassing of troops and the attempts at transgressions are in violation of several agreements that we have signed, in particular agreements in 1993 and 1996. And those issues, I think, have in many senses strengthened our resolve that unless these issues are dealt with firmly and we get full satisfaction out of the situation, we will not be able to go back to a restoration of normal ties with China. The entire agreement of 1988, based on which the two countries agreed to take forward this relationship, and I think we've done quite well over the last 4 decades or so in the way that the bilateral exchanges have progressed, with trade close to $90 billion, several exchanges at all levels. But all of this was contingent on peace and tranquility in the border areas. And here is where we have a serious issue. Now, we've had 12 rounds of senior commanders meetings on the ground. We've had several rounds of the working mechanism at the diplomatic levels. We have resolved some of the issues that were most, I would say, pressing along the border areas. But we are still, I think, in that process. We would have a 13th round quite soon. We hope that we can make headway. But we still do maintain that until we get full satisfaction that the situation that has arisen as a result of Chinese assertiveness and aggressiveness along our border areas last year is resolved, we will not be able to restore our relationship to the levels that were there before COVID or before 2020.
Now, coming to the summit that you mentioned with the US President that Prime Minister Modi had, and of course the Quad meeting. Just before the Quad meeting, the AUKUS was formed, the military pact between Australia, United Kingdom, and the US. Now, has AUKUS in some senses taken the thunder away from Quad? Quad was seen to contain China, particularly on the security front. Has that agenda gone? Is Quad just another talking shop now?
Well, let's start with Quad. And Quad, I think, has a very serious agenda. The agenda really is to fulfill what we see is our vision, a collective vision between the 4 states involved, like-minded states, of a free, open, inclusive, transparent, prosperous Indo-Pacific region. The sort of region that we live in, we want to live in, and we want to see in the future. And to that end, I think the Quad leadership has had 2 summits so far. The first was a virtual one in March, and the second one was recently in DC, which you mentioned. In both of these, you would see that there's an array of initiatives that have been taken that would further the objective of an Indo-Pacific region that we would like to see. In other words, whether you talk about the vaccine initiative to manufacture vaccines in India with financing from the US and Japan, last mile support from Australia, and have this disseminated in the Indo-Pacific region, I think is an important, very, very important cooperative effort at a time when many of the countries in the Indo-Pacific are reeling from the effects of COVID. Many of these countries don't have access to affordable quality vaccines. And this is something that is, I think, making that, we've already announced that we have a certain quantity of vaccines available that are going to go out. But by the end of 2022, we expect 1 billion vaccines to be available. We've got a sort of a compact on new and critical technologies, which is very important. Semiconductors, reliable, sustainable supply chains is part of that. We're talking about climate change actions, green hydrogen, green shipping corridors, the Quad countries coming together to promote those efforts. We're talking about HADR efforts, which is something which is a collaborative effort with the Indo-Pacific countries, with the ASEAN at the centrality of this process. We see many of our friends and partners in the Indo-Pacific increasingly interested in working with the Quad on some of its activities. In other words, this is a cooperative approach. We want to co-opt and get the cooperation of countries in the Indo-Pacific. We are not getting them into another major, I would say, great game that involves their region. What we are saying is, let's work together on the areas that you value, and the areas that are important. Connectivity, infrastructure development, building better infrastructure. These are areas that the Quad is working on.
And how does India look? Sorry, yeah, please finish.
Sorry.
I'm
AUKUS is different because
yes, I was
AUKUS
going to ask you that. What is your view about AUKUS?
Is a security alliance between 3 countries that already have a security pact between them. All of these 3 countries, of course, are countries with whom we have good relations. So I would say that AUKUS is a very different construct than Quad. AUKUS is looking at it from a purely security perspective. Quad is a group of countries that is looking at cooperative measures on the Indo-Pacific. There may be a complementarity at some level, but they're actually very different from many senses, other than the fact that they have some common membership.